My husband handed me the divorce papers on the same afternoon I'd scheduled my third embryo transfer. I remember the exact moment because I had just changed out of my work clothes. I was a structural engineer for a mid-size firm in Charlotte, and I'd rushed home early to rest before the appointment the next morning. My doctor had told me rest mattered, that stress cortisol could sabotage implantation. I'd been managing my stress like a part-time job for 8 years. He was standing in the kitchen doorway holding a manila envelope, already dressed for somewhere that wasn't home, suit jacket on, keys in his other hand. "I had my attorney draw these up," he said. "I need you to sign them." I looked at the envelope, then at him. My husband of 8 years, a corporate real estate developer, the man I had restructured my entire career trajectory around so he could take the out-of-state contracts. The man for whom I had tracked my ovulation cycles, my hormone levels, my lining thickness, my follicle counts, numbers I could recite faster than my own phone number. "We have a transfer tomorrow," I said. My voice came out steady. "I don't know how." "I know," he said. "I think it's time we both accepted that this isn't working." He meant the marriage, but he said it the same way Dr. Hartley had said it about my second transfer, so for a half-second my brain processed both simultaneously. The embryos, the marriage, neither one was working. I sat down on the kitchen floor. I didn't decide to. My legs just stopped. He stepped around me to get to the garage. The paperwork said irreconcilable differences. What it didn't say was that for the last 14 months, my husband had been sleeping with his project coordinator, a 26-year-old named Christy, who had apparently been accompanying him on every site visit to Raleigh. What it didn't say was that his mother had known for at least 6 of those months and had said nothing to me while she sat at my kitchen table eating the pot roast I'd made and asking me whether I'd considered acupuncture for my fertility issues. I found out about Christy the way most women find out, a phone notification that wasn't meant for me. He'd left his phone on the charger while he showered, and a preview popped up. That was 3 weeks before the envelope. In those 3 weeks, I didn't say anything. I kept going to my monitoring appointments. I kept taking my progesterone shots. I kept making dinners and doing laundry and going to work and pretending I lived in a house where I was still a wife and not just a woman who hadn't figured out her exit yet. I thought I was being strategic. Now I think I was just terrified. The morning after he handed me the papers, I went to the fertility clinic alone and told them to cancel the transfer. Dr. Hartley came out to speak with me personally, which she almost never did. She was a small woman with very direct eyes, and she sat across from me in her office and said, "Is there anything you want to tell me?" I told her I was getting divorced. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I have thought about almost every dance. "Margaux, I've been reviewing your file and your husband's. The implantation failures, they're not coming from your side." I had to ask her to say it again. She said it again. 8 years, 3 failed transfers. Every specialist we'd seen had told us unexplained infertility. We'd done every test available to me, blood panels, hysteroscopies, genetic screenings. At some point early on, my husband had done a semen analysis, and it had come back within normal range, which is a phrase with a lot of room in it, apparently. Dr. Hartley told me she'd recently had the sample results re-evaluated by a specialist in male factor infertility. The motility numbers, she said carefully, were not what they had been initially reported as. I signed the divorce papers that afternoon. I had $600 in a personal checking account and a lease on a car that was in both our names. I had a job that paid well, but we'd been living on his income so I could funnel most of mine into the IVF costs. The joint accounts held everything. The savings, the emergency fund, the investment accounts I had contributed to for years. The day I signed the papers, he froze them pending asset division. His mother called me that evening. She said she hoped I wouldn't make this difficult. I hung up. I packed what fit in my car. Clothes, my laptop, the framed photo of my grandmother that had sat on our mantel for 8 years, and a small cedar box my grandmother had given me before she died. Her good jewelry, pieces she'd worn her whole life. Small things. Meaningful things. I left everything else. I drove to a motel off I-85 that charged by the week and smelled like industrial carpet cleaner, and I sat on the edge of the bed and did not cry. I was too tired to cry. I just stared at the water stain on the ceilings and thought about the word motility. I found the rental house on a Thursday evening, scrolling through listings on my phone in the motel parking lot because the Wi-Fi didn't reach my room. It was a small two-bedroom in a town called Hadley Creek, about 40 minutes outside Charlotte, which meant a longer commute but a rent I could actually afford on my own while the divorce proceedings sorted out the joint assets. The listing photos showed a covered porch, hardwood floors, and a yard with an old oak tree. I signed the lease without seeing it in person. I needed to stop living in that motel. The house was exactly as advertised and nothing more. The porch railing was loose. The kitchen faucet had a slow drip. The oak tree was beautiful. I moved in on a Saturday in February with 2 carloads of my belongings and stood in the empty living room and told myself this was a beginning, even though it felt like the opposite. My neighbor came over that afternoon. I heard the knock and opened the door expecting a delivery driver or maybe a local realtor who'd seen the moving truck. Instead, it was a man about 10 years older than me, probably mid-40s, in a flannel shirt and work boots, holding a covered dish. "Lentil soup," he said. "My mother always brought soup when someone moved in. I don't know if you like lentils." I did like lentils. I hadn't eaten since the gas station coffee I'd grabbed that morning. His name was August. He told me he'd lived next door for about 3 years, that he kept to himself mostly, that the faucet in my kitchen had a bad washer, and he had the part if I wanted him to fix it. I said yes to the soup and yes to the faucet and went back inside and sat on the floor of my kitchen eating lentil soup from the pot because I hadn't unpacked any bowls yet, and I thought, well, that was a normal human interaction. I'd forgotten those existed. The divorce was slow. My husband's attorney kept filing continuances, which my own attorney told me was a delay tactic. The longer the process dragged, the more likely I'd accept a lower settlement just to be done. I understood the logic. I also understood that I was not going to let 8 years of my income and 8 years of my life get erased by a man who had been lying to me for at least 14 months. My attorney's name was Beverly. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and did not waste words. When I laid out everything, the frozen accounts, the property, my contribution records, she looked at me over her glasses and said, "He picked the wrong engineer to underestimate." I started to feel, for the first time in years, like myself. Work helped. My firm had a project in the early phases, a mixed-use development in Cabarrus County, and my manager pulled me in as project lead. It was the kind of responsibility I'd been sidestepping for years because the IVF schedule made it hard to commit to deadlines. Now there was no IVF schedule. There was just work, and I was good at it. And there was Hadley Creek, the porch with the loose railing that August fixed without being asked a second time. The way the oak tree looked in the early morning light. The diner 3 blocks down that had good biscuits and coffee that came in heavy ceramic mugs. I started to breathe again, slowly, like a person learning to swim in reverse. August and I became friends the way people become friends when they're both a little bit broken and don't feel like pretending otherwise. He wasn't chatty, neither was I, not then. We'd sit on our respective porches in the evening sometimes, and he'd have coffee and I'd have tea, and we'd just exist in the same general direction for a while. Occasionally one of us would say something about the weather or a news story or something one of us had cooked. He'd grown up in Hadley Creek. Left for a long time, came back a few years ago, he said. After some things changed. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. I recognized the shape of that kind of sentence. You say it when the longer version is still too heavy to carry into casual conversation. I told him I was going through a divorce. He said he was sorry. The way he said it didn't have any pity in it, which I appreciated more than I could explain. One evening in April, he told me he had a daughter. She was 7, and she spent weekends with him. Her name was Bia. He said it quietly, like he was still getting used to saying it out loud to people. I said she sounded lovely. He said she was, and then he looked off at the yard and didn't say anything else for a while. The next Saturday morning, I met Bia. She came barreling out of August's front door in rubber boots and a raincoat even though it wasn't raining, and she stopped at the property line and looked at me very seriously and said, "Are you the neighbor?" I said I was. She considered this. Then she said, "August says you're an engineer. Can you build a bridge?" I said I'd built several. She seemed to find this acceptable and went off to investigate something in the yard. My attorney called me in May with an update that made my hands shake. The asset review had uncovered something. My husband's firm had been using joint marital funds, money I had contributed, as part of the financing structure for a development project. The project had since been sold. The profit from that sale had gone into a business account that technically predated the marriage. His attorney was arguing that the marital funds had been absorbed and couldn't be separated. Beverly's voice, when she explained this, was very even, But I could hear something underneath it. She said, "I want to be clear, this is recoverable, but it's going to take a fight." I told her to fight. I drove home from her office and sat in my car in the driveway for a while. Then I went inside and changed into jeans and a sweatshirt, and I went and knocked on August's door. He opened it, looked at me. Didn't ask what was wrong, I said. "Can I sit on your porch for a while?" He said, "Yeah. I'll get coffee." I sat on his porch steps and listened to the oak tree, and thought about my grandmother, who had immigrated to this country from the Philippines with $40 and a sewing kit, who had worked for 30 years so my mother could go to college, who had given me her jewelry not because the pieces were valuable, but because she wanted me to carry something of hers when she was gone. I thought about how she would have handled this. She would have fought. The thing about August was that I didn't fall for him all at once. It wasn't a moment, it was an accumulation. It was the way he talked to Bea, patient and direct, never condescending. The way he fixed things around his house methodically on weekends, without making a performance of it. The way he made coffee strong enough to stand up on its own and always made enough for two. The fact that he read actual books, paperbacks with cracked spines. The fact that he never once asked me what my plan was or implied that I should be over my divorce faster. One evening in June, he told me what the Some Things Changed had been. He'd left Hadley Creek about 15 years ago for a job in federal law enforcement. He'd worked counterintelligence for 11 years. He left because his ex-wife wanted a divorce, and he'd agreed, eventually, that they'd been strangers living in the same house. He came back here because his father was aging and needed someone around, and because he'd spent 11 years being someone else and wanted to find out if he remembered how to be himself. He said all of this to the middle distance. Not to me exactly, but to the air between us, which amounted to the same thing. I said, "Did you?" He said, "Getting there." I thought about that for a long time afterward. In August, the month, not the man, though they coincided, two things happened. The first was that Beverly called to tell me the judge had ruled in our favor on the marital asset dispute. My contributions to the joint accounts were fully recoverable, plus a share of the appreciation. The property split went as expected. I would not be walking away with everything, but I would be walking away with what was mine, which was more than I'd feared in those first weeks at the motel. The second was that I felt sick for 4 days in a row and couldn't figure out why. I'd had irregular cycles since stopping the fertility medications. My reproductive endocrinologist had told me it might take months for things to normalize. So when I was late, I assumed it was that. The hormones, the stress, the general disruption of the past year. I bought the test at a pharmacy 2 towns over, for reasons I couldn't fully articulate except that Hadley Creek was small and I didn't want to explain anything to anyone. I sat in my bathroom with the test on the counter and did not look at it for 7 minutes. Then I looked at it. I had to call my doctor to confirm because I didn't trust what I was seeing. She confirmed it. She also said, calmly, that given the previous fertility findings regarding my husband, I should be prepared to understand that this pregnancy was, mesmically speaking, impossible with him. She was gentle about it. She didn't editorialize. I sat on my bathroom floor for a long time. Then I went next door and knocked on August's door. He opened it. He took one look at me. He said, "Come inside." Bea was with her mother that weekend, so the house was quiet. He put coffee in front of me and sat across from me and waited. I said, "I'm pregnant." He was very still for a moment. Then something moved across his face. Not surprise exactly, more like a man carefully setting something down before he responds. "Tell me what you need," he said. I said I didn't know. I said I was scared. I said I had spent 8 years being told my body wasn't doing what it was supposed to do, and now it was doing it and I didn't know how to metabolize that. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "Your body was doing what it was supposed to do the whole time," he said. That wasn't the problem. I knew what he meant. I knew he was right. My doctor had been right. I had been right, in the wordless way you sometimes know things before you have permission to know them. I started to cry then. The real kind, not the dignified kind. The kind that's 8 years in the making. He didn't try to stop it or fix it. He just kept his hand on mine and let me cry until I was done. I told him we needed to talk about what this meant. He said we had time. I said I wasn't sure I knew what I was asking from him. That I'd been someone's wife, and it had meant something and then it hadn't, and I didn't know how to be certain of anything. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Margaux, I've known since about March that I wanted to be wherever you were. I wasn't going to say anything because I didn't think you were ready to hear it. I'm still not going to pressure you. But I want you to know that whatever you need, now or through this or after, I'm not going anywhere. I believed him. I don't know how to explain why I was so certain, only that I was. My ex-husband found out about the pregnancy through his own mother, who heard it through someone in town. I have no idea how it spread that fast. Small towns have their own infrastructure. He called me. For the first time since the divorce had been finalized, he called from his personal cell phone, and his voice had something in it I hadn't heard before. Not anger. Something more like panic. He said, "I heard you're pregnant." I said, "That's correct." He said, That's not possible." His voice cracked slightly on the second knot. I said, "My doctor disagrees." He was quiet, and in that silence I realized he knew. He had known all along, or at least suspected, that the problem had never been mine. Maybe not consciously, maybe not fully. But somewhere underneath all the specialists and the suggestions and the long, silent disappointments, he had known, and instead of facing it, he had let me carry it. I said, "I hope you're well." And I ended the call. I sat for a moment with the phone in my hand. I thought I would feel more. Triumph, maybe, or anger, or some closing of a door. Mostly what I felt was tired. Tired and enormously, quietly grateful to be sitting in my own kitchen in Hadley Creek, in a house with a loose porch railing that had been fixed, with a view of an oak tree, and a cup of tea that was still warm. The twins announced themselves at my 12-week ultrasound. The technician said, "And there's the second one," with this very particular tone, the tone of someone who has delivered this news before and knows that there is no correct way to receive it. I sat up on the table and said, "Sorry, the second what?" Two heartbeats, side by side on the screen. I stared at that image for a long time. I thought about my grandmother. I thought about $40 and a sewing kit and 30 years of work. I thought about how much she would have laughed. I was 37 years old, nearly 8 months out from the worst night of my life, sitting in an exam room in a paper gown, looking at two heartbeats, and I felt something I can only describe as the specific joy that comes from being completely wrong about what your life is going to look like. August was in the waiting room. He stood up when I came out. I held up 2 fingers. He looked at my hand, then at my face. Then a slow smile started, the kind he didn't give away often. "Two," he said. "Two," I said. He pulled me into a hug the first time we'd done that somehow, and I put my face against his shoulder and laughed until my eyes watered, and he laughed too, quietly, into my hair. We stood there in the fluorescent light of the OB waiting room, 2 thoroughly unglamorous people in the middle of an ordinary Thursday, and it was one of the best moments of my life. The divorce had been finalized for 3 months by then. We had time. What I mean is, we chose each other carefully. On purpose. Not in the dizzy, urgent way I had chosen the first time, when I was 28 and in love with the idea of a future more than with the man in it. This was slower. We had both been broken in ways that had taught us exactly what we actually needed, which is a brutal kind of education but an effective one. He met with Beverly, who was also a notary, for reasons unrelated to law. That part I will keep to myself. What I'll say is that on a Saturday in October, with Bea standing between us in her rubber boots on a slightly muddy patch of the Hadley Creek Town Park, and my college roommate there and August's father there with his cane and his good jacket, we said what we meant to say. Bea had informed us both beforehand that she would be in charge of the rings, which she delivered with great ceremony and only dropped once. My daughter was born first, which surprised the doctor and delighted everyone. My son came 4 minutes later, apparently in no hurry. They were small and furious and perfect. August held them both before I did, because there were things happening on my end that required a team of nurses and my full attention. He stood near the window in the delivery room with one in each arm, a human previously known for being very contained and rather quiet, and he was crying. Not dramatically. Just steadily, the way rain comes when it means it. Bea, who had been waiting in the hall, was allowed in after everything had settled. She walked over to August very seriously, looked at the babies, then looked at me. "They're small," she said. "I said they'd get bigger." She thought about this. Then she climbed up into the chair beside my bed and put her small hand on top of mine and sat there with me while August rocked her brother and sister, and none of us said anything for a while. My ex-husband's affair partner left him 14 months later when she discovered he'd been also seeing someone from his firm's Chicago office. I didn't find this out from him. I found it out because his mother, of all people, called me. She said she was sorry. She said she had thought she was protecting her son. She said she could see now that she hadn't been. I thanked her for calling. I meant it. The real estate market in Charlotte had a correction that year that hit heavily leveraged developers particularly hard. His firm lost 2 major contracts. I don't know the details, and I chose not to investigate them. I had other things to know. I was learning what my daughter's laugh sounded like. I was learning the difference between her cry and her brother's. I was learning that my son had August's precise, watchful stillness, and my daughter had my grandmother's stubbornness, which I recognized because it was also mine. I kept the cedar box on the dresser, my grandmother's jewelry, the small hoop earrings she wore every day of her adult life until she couldn't anymore, the ring she'd bought herself for her 40th birthday, the thin gold chain she'd owned since she was a girl in the province, the one she said had survived everything. I wore the chain on the day I brought the twins home from the hospital. I wore it because she couldn't be there, and I wanted her there, and it was the closest I could come. August noticed it. He touched it lightly and looked at me and didn't ask anything, because by then he knew what things meant without needing the whole story. That's what it is, finally, to know someone. To be known. I spent 8 years believing the thing that was broken was me. I spent 8 years in a house where I was invisible in the most precise way, seen but not known, present but not understood. I had tracked every number in my body and never once thought to track what was actually happening in my marriage. I was not broken, I was in the wrong place. I know that now. I knew it the moment the doctor said second heartbeat, and I looked at the screen and felt, for the first time in longer than I could remember, that my body had been on my side the whole time. Standing in my kitchen in Hadley Creek on a Tuesday morning, twins on a double nursing pillow, Bea eating cereal across from me and reading something off her tablet, August leaving a coffee cup next to my elbow on his way out the door, I thought, this is what I was supposed to have, not instead of the years I lost, alongside them, growing out of them, because of them, in a way. I am 38 years old, and I am the one who decides what my life looks like now. And it looks like this, messy and tired and improbably full, in a house with a fixed porch railing and a tremendous oak tree, with a woman who survived long enough to find out she was never the problem.